Okay, let me get started. Welcome to this second of three brown bag lunchtime series here at EH&S. Today's topic is Zika and other mosquito-borne infections. It's a pretty timely issue, so why don't I get started on this? So this is who I am, Rich Pollock. I'm here. I'm the Senior Environmental Public Health Officer for EH&S. And first off, it's good to know what I know about this. So I've been at the School of Public Health at Harvard since 1988. I'm a vector biologist, study mosquitoes and mosquito-borne diseases, as well as ticks and all sorts of other creepy crawlies. Those are my specialties. Over here, I help with dealing with those issues on campus and amongst our folks in our community. So I wear an academic hat. I have this service position. I also advise the state and the CDC on these issues. And in fact, just this past weekend, I was invited to the Zika hackathon held down at MGH. So it was a nice two-day affair. They brought people, vector biologists, well, me, folks from business, from engineering, all sorts of different backgrounds together to try to understand what some of the problems are, put their collective genius together to come up with new technologies, to innovate. There's some really neat ideas that were thrown about, and well, we'll see what happens. Some of those may end up with a solution, but it's a good opportunity. So what do I know about this? A fair bit, I think, and I also have been intimate with mosquitoes. One of these crazy people putting an arm in cage to allow the mosquitoes to feed. And I already mentioned this, which was this past weekend. Okay, enough about me, but so Zika has been in the news for the last couple of months. It's been front page news. It still shows up there occasionally. So local news, schools cancel trips amid Zika fears. Boston officials say they can't risk dangerous consequences. So obviously people are afraid about this. Should they cancel their travel plans? Where should they go? Where should they not go? How can they protect themselves? Do they even need to go someplace else in order to be in order to acquire Zika infection? Another local story, 3 Zika virus cases confirmed in Massachusetts. Oh my goodness, Zika is here. Well, but what does that really mean? That's what I hope to talk about in the next 50 minutes. CDC updates Zika advice for sex and pregnancy. Virus has spread to at least 34 countries and territories. So yeah, it's spreading, as is the worry about it. And then WHO declares the spread of Zika in the Americas an international emergency. All good reasons to be front page news, but should it be? And that's something I want to explore as well. So, what is Zika? Where did it come from? And how? Why is it appearing now? Why can't we eradicate or vaccinate ourselves? Should we be scared of Zika virus? And is it in Boston and Cambridge? Well, obviously it's in Massachusetts. It actually is here in Boston and Cambridge. But should you be scared? I don't think so. So Zika is a virus. It's a virus that's adapted to be transmitted by certain kinds of mosquitoes, and it goes between non-human primates in its ancestral home in East Africa, in Uganda. It was maintained in a silent cycle between these tree-loving non-human primates, monkeys, chimpanzees, baboons, that were fed upon by mosquitoes that prefer to feed on those kinds of animals, up in the tree canopy or wherever those primates were hanging out. So this was going on probably for millennia, as happens with a very, very long list of other infections transmitted by one or another kind of mosquito. The list is really impressive of what we know, and that's probably a tiny fraction of what's actually out there in the environment. So this cycle was unknown until about 1947, when somebody happened to grind up some mosquitoes, test them, and found they were looking for something else, they found this new virus. It turned out to be something they called Zika virus from the Zika forest of Uganda. No big worry, because it didn't seem to affect people. So this transmission cycle doesn't involve people. Well, as people encroach into the forest, to live there, to cut down the forests, to use the land for other purposes, they get exposed to mosquitoes that normally feed on other kinds of animals. That's likely how the first human being became infected with the Zika virus. So, we intruded into a natural cycle and we picked up that virus. This happens all the time. We see this with all sorts of other infections. So you could call this spillover. These are accidental cases. In most cases, not much will come of it. But if the person who is infected goes back into his or her community and is fed upon by yet other kinds of mosquitoes that prefer to feed on people, then we set up another cycle of transmission. So here's the forest cycle, which goes on silently forever. Now we've moved the virus into the human population, into our cities and towns, where we have other kinds of mosquitoes that are plentiful because we create habitat for them. We give them food, our own blood, and we set up these secondary cycles. Sean?
Is West Nile virus similar to that?
Absolutely. Yeah, West Nile first showed up in 1999 in the Western Hemisphere. Well,
we disrupted some kind of
yeah, West Nile virus, which is fairly closely related to this one, actually, normally cycles between birds and bird-feeding mosquitoes. We moved it over here. It's not quite clear how, and it's set up shop. And we had this wave of the spread of West Nile virus across the landscape, across the entire continent. It was very efficiently transmitted here because we have a mosquito that is able to do that and which likes to feed on people occasionally. And so we had this raging epidemic, followed a few years later by somewhat of a reduction in transmission. It's out there, it's endemic, it always will be something we have to live with. So, and it's no longer on the front pages of our newspapers, usually. The same thing I think is going to happen with Zika. It's a new virus, no one here has ever seen it before. We're all immunologically naive, we have no immunity to it. Through time, more and more people are going to become infected by it, and we're going to see this rise in the tide in transmission. And in a couple of years, we're going to see a reduction. It'll never be gone. All right, so that's where we are today. It's moved into the human population. Actually, it's been in the human population for some years. I'll show you some maps showing how this thing's moved around the globe. But it's our turn. We have it here in North America. So I think it's helpful now to understand a little bit about mosquitoes. That way I can describe a bit more about how Zika and mosquitoes work. So for most people, mosquitoes are a minor annoyance. One little mosquito, big deal. Buzzes in your ear, sings to you at night, you slap it or try to. Elsewhere, these things are a real quality of life issue. So you go down to the Everglades in August, you go up to the far north, the tundra of Canada or Asia, and 30 seconds outside, this is how you appear. It's a huge economic issue because you're feeding lots of mosquitoes. Mosquitoes themselves can cause some direct harm, but usually the harm is associated with the various pathogens they transmit. There are viruses, bacteria, worms, protozoa, and other things that mosquitoes transmit. Some of these things only infect mosquitoes. They're mosquito diseases. So who cares if the mosquitoes get sick and nothing else will? Other things like West Nile, Zika virus, yellow fever, malaria make us sick. And worse, if it gets into the wrong kind of host, in this case a human being, well, birds would, as far as we know, birds are not involved with Zika, but for many of the other infections transmitted by mosquitoes, I mentioned earlier, birds are involved. So it kills a lot of birds as well. So West Nile kills a lot of birds. People normally think, oh, humans are at risk. Well, we are to some extent, but a lot more birds will die from that infection. So the scariest things about Zika is this sort of thing. This is essentially the first well-documented association that we have between a mosquito-borne virus and a developmental problem, a neurodevelopmental problem. Now, many of the arboviruses, the arthropod-borne viruses, arthropods being those creatures with jointed legs and exoskeletons, so mosquitoes qualify, many of them are what we call neurotropic. They they tend to infect the cells of the brain or elsewhere, and they can cause real havoc. We have some infections locally that do that, but they generally just make you very ill or kill you. This one seems to target some of these neurologic progenitor cells, the developing fetus. They're multiplying, they're growing, and there's this strong association, and stronger every day that goes by, that it's not just a coincidence. We still don't know for sure that Zika virus is the cause of this, or the only cause. It may be that there are other factors going on. Some other kind of infection that is occurring at the same time. It could be an environmental insult, a drug, a chemical, some food that people are eating. And the reason I say this is because in some parts of South America, there's a much higher rate of microcephaly, this tiny head and tiny brain. It's a much greater prevalence of that than other places, even within the same country. We don't know what's going on. So there are people working hot and heavy in the laboratory, in the field, to try to figure that out. Has the virus changed in some way? Has it mutated to make itself more dangerous? Well, that's certainly one possible explanation. But it could also be that people just happen to have a different infection at the same time, and the two together has caused this. We don't know the answer to it. We'll have to wait and see. In the next weeks and months, we're going to learn a lot more. So in the interim, CDC, WHO, and others have issued all sorts of warnings or advisories. So here's one on the CDC website. Pregnant Zika is linked to birth defects, but linked doesn't mean cause. And it suggests if you're going to or coming from areas with Zika, you protect yourself during pregnancy, don't let mosquitoes bite you, and talk to your doctor about the risk to your pregnancy. And we don't know much to advise the doctors as to what to tell their patients. Okay. Now some more fun here. This may be hard to see because it's so dark. Most people don't understand the basics about mosquitoes, so I'm going to very quickly try to go through some of this. So these are a bunch of mosquito eggs, and these are actually Aedes eggs, the kind of mosquito that transmits Zika. And let's see if I can get this to work. And that didn't. Oops. This should do it. So if you look down here, there's a larva hatching out from the egg. Something you likely will never see. So you get one larva from one egg. This occurs in the water. These are aquatic organisms, fresh water, and Aedes mosquitoes like small containers. So Sean's little full foods cup here that would be heaven for one of these mosquitoes.
They're delicious.
Well, they probably are, but it's a very small meal. You need a lot to make an omelet. Okay. Now, what hatches out are the larvae. They are air-breathing creatures. They live in the water. If they dry out, they're going to die. So, let's see if I can get this to run. Yeah, there we go. They move around. So there's the water surface. They reach up to the surface, and they actively breathe air. And they're feeding. You can see down here that at the head end, they've got these little mouth brushes that are quickly running through the water column. What they're basically doing, just imagine a bunch of lawn rakes, and rather than getting leaves, they're actually picking up bacteria and other small bits of debris and detritus, squeezing it down into a little bolus, squeezing the water out of it, popping it in the mouth, and then it proceeds in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, all of that through their gut, and it comes out the other end, and they've digested away any organic particles. So they're very efficient at doing that. They don't blood feed. Yes, Cindy?
I was just wondering how big are they? Can you see them at this point?
Oh, they're huge. Look at that size. Oh, yeah, yeah. So the hatchling, what you saw coming out of the egg, maybe about a little less than a millimeter for most species. So if you can read the New York Times or any other paper without glasses or with glasses, you should be able to see them. You may not know what they are. And as they grow, they go through 4 stages of larval development. They get maybe half a centimeter, or less than a quarter inch long. Okay, so that takes a week or longer depending on the temperature. And then that transforms into a pupa, which sort of like the chrysalis or cocoon of a caterpillar or butterfly. And they're also air breathing, and they hang out at the water surface as well. They don't feed. And there it is. It just kind of hangs out, and if it gets disturbed, it will tumble about a bit. I'm going to see if I can move this forward for the sake of time. No, these things are fine. And they serve as fish food and food for other kinds of insects. All right, so I'm going to stop it here. Oh, let me move this back. This is coming up a time-lapse video. This is speeded up dramatically. So this is one pupa. It's swallowing air, and through hydrostatic pressure, it's squeezing itself out of the skin of the pupal stage. Look at that. This takes just a couple of minutes. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty neat. Okay, so now she's fully formed. Now, unlike a butterfly or a moth that has to sit there for a couple of hours and expand the wings and wait for them to dry and harden, she's good to go. As soon as she's out of that pupal skin, she can fly. And within a couple of hours or a day, if it's a female, she's going to go looking for food. And that's usually blood. And it may be from people, maybe from other animals. Okay, so now where do mosquitoes live? We have in Massachusetts 53 different species that we know of here. And around the world, the catalog of mosquitoes is like this. There are hundreds in every country, maybe thousands. Each kind of mosquito, a mosquito is not a mosquito is not a mosquito. They're all closely related, but they have dramatically different biology. Their habitat is different. The kind of animals that they're attracted to are considerably different. So here, this is just a selection of different kinds of habitats for mosquitoes. We have some mosquitoes here that only you find in snowmelt pools. They're out in the late spring, or in the early spring actually, and then they're gone, one generation a year. Salt marsh areas have their own mosquitoes. Rice paddies up here, we don't have too many of those in Massachusetts. They've got their own species associated with that habitat. Hoof prints, that's heaven for several kinds of very dangerous mosquitoes around the world. Not here. We have a mosquito here that only lives in the water within pitcher plants. Nowhere else. And that mosquito is a good mosquito because it never blood feeds. It's a fascinating mosquito nonetheless. And there are mosquitoes that live in the water collected within the leaf axils of bromeliads around the world. Some of those are dangerous. What I want to draw your attention to is this, tree holes. It's a natural habitat. Go out sometime as you're walking across campus, look at some of the trees, and you'll see a big branch coming up in a little rotted area in the crotch, what it's called. And it collects water, and it's a habitat for some kinds of mosquitoes, tree hole mosquitoes. So there's several species we have here, and many more elsewhere, that specialize in that habitat. And so the ones that are involved with Zika transmission, that's where they really prefer. But there are only so many tree holes out there. But we provide them with lots more habitats. From their perspective, a disused automobile tire is a perfect habitat. It holds water. There's no way to store these outside without them collecting water. You can't really empty them without boring holes in them, which is not easy to do. There are millions and millions. The U.S. alone imports somewhere around 100 million disused tires every single year. And these mosquitoes arrive all the time in those tires as eggs. Elsewhere, they find water within vases, which if you go in the tropics, everybody's home has vases and water jugs within the house and around the house. Even these sorts of habitats. So these are all heaven for these mosquitoes, and they like human blood. Okay. There we go. All right. Can you see that? Is that too dark? Okay. So I know Catherine doesn't want to see this. So here's a close-up, sort of a mosquito doing its dirty work. So she doesn't burrow into the skin. It's a fine stylet a fine proboscis of about 7 different mouth parts. They're long and flexible, and they slide against each other, and she just drills into the top layer of the skin, looking for a blood vessel. Now, the neat thing is, if you were to slice your skin and look at it under the microscope, there are a lot of blood vessels in there, but actually you're more likely going to hit a site that has no blood vessels. There's a lot of space between the vessels. So it's difficult for her to find it, but she has all the chemical sensory systems to be able to detect, oh, I'm getting closer, and you're going to see in an upcoming picture how that's done. So let's see if we can do that one, and I really hope that we can see that here. Just a full screen. Okay, so this is looking into the skin. This is actually a mouse ear, but it's hard to see. But here's her stylets. She's in the skin, and this is a blood vessel. If it was dark in this room, it would be red. You'd see the red blood cells flowing through. And she actually is able to cannulate that vessel. She's the best blood drawer. And then now, it's not the pressure of the blood in the capillaries that's causing her to fill up. That would be impossible. Instead, what happens is she has these 2 absolutely amazing and powerful valves up in her neck area. Get rid of this. Go back here. And she draws a vacuum. So sort of like a vacuum cleaner, but on steroids. So she really pulls that vacuum, and the blood is flowing in. The width of the mouth parts, the lumen through which the blood's flowing, is just slightly more than a red blood cell. But it's really flowing quickly because of the pressure. Now, okay, but more, I'm getting ahead of myself there. Okay, behaviorally, mosquitoes differ dramatically. So here we have a mosquito outside, a person inside, and a person outside the house. Some kinds of mosquitoes will come and feed on people outside, and almost never will come indoors. Other kinds of mosquitoes, may come to a person, but they're more likely to feed on some other kind of animal. It could be a cow, a deer, a bird, whatever. And some of those may never, ever feed on a person. Some mosquitoes will find their way in through open doors and windows and attack people inside while you're sleeping or whatever you're doing. And after they've fed, some of them will rest on the indoor walls of the house or the hut, and yet others will fly out the window and rest outside. So we know the behavior for an awful lot of the most important mosquitoes. The Aedes aegypti mosquito, the one which is most involved with transmitting the Zika virus, doesn't have to go through so much of this. It can survive entirely within a home. So it can be born within a cup. A female can come in somehow, lay her eggs within a cup or around a plant vase, whatever. The larvae will hatch, develop, and a few days later, a new generation of adults will take to the wing. How far do they have to go to find blood? A couple of feet. While you're sleeping, they'll partake in a meal, and then they'll rest, maybe underneath your bed or desk or wherever. And then a few days later, after they've digested that meal, they've turned your blood into their eggs of the next generation. They then deposit their eggs, and those eggs then need to sit for a matter of weeks or months, actually, until they're ready to hatch. And those eggs can survive drying. In fact, they must be dry. They survive drying sometimes for months and months. And when it rains again, or you add water to your plants and flood those eggs, the larvae hatch out, sometimes within minutes. Okay, a few other differences. This is important here as well. Some kinds of mosquitoes feed mainly at dawn and dusk, and rarely at other times. Yet other kinds of mosquitoes, the first one is at night. The next group feed at dawn and dusk. There's some that really don't care. Any time that they're hungry is fair game. The yellow fever mosquito, the one that transmits the Zika virus mainly, is mainly active during the day. So whereas it may feed on you at night, you're much more inclined to encounter it during the day. Now most people will think of a mosquito this way, as a flying syringe. So let's say I'm circulating Zika virus in my bloodstream, a mosquito comes and lands on me. Let's say it's the right kind of mosquito for supporting this virus. So it sucks up some blood, pulling that back in. And then it flies off someplace, and then later on, let's say it comes back to you. Most people, and Gary Larson, the cartoonist, and others would like you to think about that maybe it's a syringe, that it's regurgitating blood or some infectious material back into a person or some other host. Well, not really. A mosquito cannot regurgitate. It's physically impossible for a mosquito to regurgitate. Instead, what happens is this. Well, actually, this. So there's a stylized mosquito, big mosquito, little person. The blood comes in the front end of the mosquito and ends up in her gut. There it's digested over a period of several days. If there's a mosquito-borne virus, and if it's the right kind of mosquito, that virus will infect the cells that line her belly. If it's any other kind of virus, so HIV, hepatitis B, whatever, it gets digested. It becomes a tiny bit of nutrition for the mosquito, and then it's pooped out the back. But if it's a virus that's normally transmitted by mosquitoes, it infects the cells lining her gut, and it undergoes a cycle of replication. So let's say you get 1,000 virus particles going in, and let's say all of those find their way to the gut wall just by diffusion. After a couple of days, instead of 1,000 viruses in the mosquito, you may have 1 million or 5 million viruses. It's a lot of virus. Now, is that mosquito dangerous? No, not really. The only way that mosquito could pose any harm to you at that point is if you grabbed it, ground it up, and mainlined it into a vein. And I don't think too many people are going to do it. Yes, it's got a lot of virus in it. It's just slapping it on the skin, no problem. But after this cycle of replication of the virus in the gut, it breaks out into the body cavity of the mosquito and is carried around as the mosquito's blood is flowing about. And it ends up, soon thereafter, touching the outside of the salivary glands. So just like we have salivary glands, so do they. They look a lot different and function in a different way. But the goal is the same, to produce a lot of saliva. They need saliva to lubricate their mouth parts, to, in some cases, make it less likely you're going to feel the mosquito as it's biting you. There are anesthetic agents in some of these mosquitoes. And it also helps prepare the skin for blood flow. Once they hit a capillary, it causes the capillary to open up and flow that much better. So all of that, and it stops the blood from clotting. Imagine if you're a female mosquito and you're sucking blood and the blood clots in your mouth parts. And it's the end of the line for you. So it's a very important substance. So what happens is the virus gets up to the salivary glands, it replicates again. So instead of 5 million, maybe now you're up to 8 million viruses in that mosquito. At that point, the mosquito is truly dangerous because the next animal she bites, she will spit into the skin, and that's when she's delivering the payload. She doesn't have to feed. She's just searching for a blood vessel, and as soon as she does that, you're it. You have the virus. Okay, so this all takes time. So the mosquito picks up the virus today. It's not going to be able to transmit for at the very least 3 days, more likely 5 or 6 days thereafter. And mosquitoes, for the most part, don't live all that long, but enough do. All right, so how do you protect yourself against mosquitoes and the things that they transmit? Well, you can exercise avoidance. Don't go where you're going to find those mosquitoes or the mosquitoes of concern. If you're around your homes here, there are other arboviruses that are transmitted in Massachusetts. You're outside barbecuing and you're getting nailed by mosquitoes, maybe go inside and barbecue some other time. Dress appropriately. The more skin you cover up, the less of a target you are for mosquitoes. Although the salt marsh mosquito, and I showed a picture of the salt marsh, they can feed right through the denim of jeans, and they're happy to do so. Use a EPA approved or registered repellent. There are many on the market. You all know about DEET. There are several others. You can use some of these on your skin, some on your clothing. They actually do work, but you have to, just like people tend not to put on enough sunscreen, people tend not to put on enough repellent. And for many of these things, you have to reapply it just a few hours later. If you're indoors, make sure wherever you're staying has screens. If you're in the tropics, in a malarious region, you probably want to use a bed net and know how to use it properly. Mosquitoes are very weak flyers. So if you, and this is a method I often have used in the tropics, you put a little table fan on, and assuming you have electricity, I'd always carry a battery-powered one, I just have it blow across you. One, you're a lot more comfortable, and two, that breeze tends to blow the mosquitoes away. It also takes your odor, the carbon dioxide and the host odors that you're exuding into the air, which they can detect and follow. It dilutes that. Pesticides, there are a bunch of pesticides that can be used inside homes and offices, but that's usually not the best way to deal with this, and habitat modification. So the yellow fever mosquito, the one that transmits Zika virus, and yellow fever and several other things, this is the preferred habitat. The tree hole as well as these. And again, every home has buckets and bottles and bird baths and jars and disused tires. Eliminating that habitat can do a lot to get rid of the mosquitoes. Not all of them, but you won't be your own worst enemy. So if you clean up around your house and your neighbor cleans up around his or her house, then you may be a little more comfortable and a little lower risk associated with some of these mosquito-borne agents. So travel safely. Before you travel, contact your physician. If you go to EH&S, call their travel consultation line. They're going to ask, where are you going to travel, when, what are your plans, what are you going to do there? And they'll give you some very good advice as to when you should start thinking about getting vaccinations. Sometimes it's months before you travel, what kind of medications you might take, how else you can protect yourself. I usually see people after they've come back from foreign travel and they've picked up something, and then it's a little too late. That's a different story. Okay, so advice. And we've got some EH&S folks here. Bother them, and as soon as possible. CDC has some absolutely terrific information freely available on their website, as do many other health authorities, and we have some as well, and I'm happy to offer whatever advice I can, and so feel free to contact me. So how did Zika get here, and will it be transmitted locally? So here's the spread up until, so different colors. We have these darker things where we have reported active transmission, where we know the virus is actively cycling between mosquitoes and people. In blue, we have where we have Zika cases, but we have not confirmed that there's actually a mosquito cycle going on. And then we have the Zika reports prior to 2015. Actually, those here, here, and here. You'll see this better on the next slide. Only two of these colors show up well on this screen. Okay, so here's the travel log. Uganda in 1947 was when it was first detected. Probably been there a long time. Within a couple of decades, it was found elsewhere. How did it get around? Mosquito's not going to fly that far. Probably a human being who was infected got on an airplane just at the right time. They were circulating the virus in their bloodstream, and happened to be bitten by a local mosquito where they landed. This happens all the time. Usually it just kind of dies out, but in a few cases it established, obviously. We had an epidemic here on Yap Island, raging epidemic in 2007, and that raised a yellow flag amongst the international health community as to what's going to happen next. There were a number of predictions like we're going to see it here eventually, and it did. It sort of hopscotched down, showing up in South America about 2 years ago, and took a good foothold there, and then has moved up. And now we've got it in the southern U.S. So, that's where the current situation. Next year at this time, I think we're going to see yet other colors on this map. CDC had, up until about 2 weeks ago, these maps. The one on the left is Aedes aegypti yellow fever mosquito, the one that is mainly involved with transmitting this virus. And the one on the right, Aedes albopictus, or the Asian tiger mosquito. This mosquito first arrived in North America, probably the earliest days of sailing ships, and established a foothold here. This one, Aedes albopictus, showed up in the 1970s. There are multiple introductions, probably mainly in those disused tire casings that came in as eggs. They were transshipped all around the U.S. It got warm in the summertime, it rained, and then we had havoc come out. Fortunately, that mosquito on the right, it's a tremendous, tremendous annoyance, but as far as we know, it's not transmitting that much. This is the much more dangerous mosquito, and so these are the current ranges, geographic ranges of these mosquitoes. Last week, CDC just launched these two maps, the potential range of the vector, which I completely disagree with. This is based on historical records, and maybe in 50 years the mosquitoes may move to this extent. It was a terrible disservice that they put these up, because the newspapers all grabbed this and said, mosquitoes have moved. No, they haven't. Those top two pretty much define the range. Now, in the mid to late 1700s, we had Aedes aegypti mosquitoes here in Boston. They were brought in every summer on sailing vessels plying the eastern seaboard, coming up from the West Indies, and they'd be bringing mosquitoes, living in those water casks on board. There'd be slaves and other human cargo inside carrying the virus, and there's transmission occurring during the several weeks of transit as these boats came up. And they landed in Philadelphia and Boston, New York, and we had epidemics of yellow fever. We don't have those wooden sailing ships coming up anymore, and we all live in much better conditions. We don't have, well, up here at least, we have air conditioning, our window screens, so there's a lot of protection that we have. So should Zika be the top worry? I don't think so. There are other mosquitoes out there, other mosquito-borne diseases, which are far, far more dangerous. Malaria is probably the top of the list. Malaria kills a lot of people every year, and makes many more incredibly ill. So if you're going to try to protect yourself against something, if you're traveling around the world, think about how you're going to protect yourself from malaria. And as a sideline, you might get protected against some of these other mosquito-borne transmissions. West Nile fever virus, the dengue viruses, yellow fever still out there. This is actually becoming epidemic in various parts of the world. And this is actually far more deadly than Zika. Chikungunya has been in the news for a couple of years, but it's been pushed off the map because of Zika. And this EEE, anyone who spent even one summer around eastern Massachusetts knows about EEE, Eastern Equine Encephalomyelitis virus. Of all of the viruses, and malaria is not a virus, but of all of these, the most serious is actually EEE. It's what we have here. It's endemic. It's maintained here in the environment. If you're going to stand in line to get a mosquito-transmitted illness, you don't want to stand in the EEE line unless you have a death wish. You're very likely to become profoundly ill, and if you become profoundly ill, you're very likely to die. And if you survive, perhaps that's even worse, because you have a high probability of being essentially a vegetable for the rest of your life. A terrible thing. And we have several people in Massachusetts like that. Instead, I would stand in the line for West Nile or for chikungunya or maybe even Zika, because you're less likely to even become ill. A few people, out of every 100, just a few people are likely to become ill. And of those, you're not likely to become profoundly ill, and you're even less likely to die. So, but why the concern about Zika, other than it being the new kid on the block? Well, because of the presumed linkage with birth defects. And that's a very scary thing. Anything affecting a developing fetus is very, very scary. And there are other health-related issues. There's this thing called Guillain-Barré syndrome, a neurologic condition that can affect an adult as well. So what do we do about it? I already told you about personal protection that you might take. Against mosquitoes here in Massachusetts, we're very lucky. We're incredibly wealthy and we have good resources. Much of the country doesn't have this. We clear our waterways in many places to allow the flow to return. Mosquitoes don't like flowing water, so they're swept out to sea. So when people throw shopping carts and all that road sand flows into our creeks and streams and rivers and slows down the flow or blocks it, it creates a big mosquito problem. Now that won't pose a problem for Zika, but it does for some of the other things I mentioned. We treat our catch basins, and we do this here on campus. The mosquito control people treat these with actually a biological insecticide to kill larvae. And some of these things can be used inside homes if you live in an area where the yellow fever mosquito is growing, living in your house. Very safe, unless you're a mosquito. You can spray yards in various ways, and sometimes airplanes go up and trucks ply the streets. All of these things are very useful tools for combating some mosquito-transmitted infections, such as EEE. But they'll have virtually no effect against Zika, because Zika is what we call a peridomestic illness. It's in and around your home. So you have to target each home as a separate entity. And it's a very difficult thing to do. And I'll be happy to describe more about that in a minute. So is there any bright side to this? Well, if you have any interest in going to the Olympics, you can really clean up on tickets. They're probably going to end up giving away tickets to the Olympics in Rio. So what do we do at EH&S? We dispense advice, do inspections. I interact with the County Mosquito Control Program here, interact with UHS and Mass Department of Public Health and CDC to make sure you've got good advice. Is there a likelihood of local transmission of Zika virus from, if you return back from a trip? Perhaps, and that will be direct from person to person. So there have been documented cases of Zika infection via sexual transmission. We still don't know how long the Zika virus remains active and alive within a person's body. Almost all of the mosquito-borne infections that we know, and a long list has been very well studied, assuming you survive that infection, after about 7 days, give or take a few, you've eliminated it. Your immune system has knocked out the virus, it's gone for good, and you'll be immune to that virus. So the next mosquito that comes by that transmits that virus to you, you're good to go. You're not going to get sick. You have protection. But this is a strange virus because it seems to spill out into unusual locations. So it can be transmitted person to person. We think for a very limited time, a matter of days, a week. There's some suggestion that maybe it's longer than that for some people, but it may be that people are not really saying, reporting everything that they know about it. People like to be private about their private lives. So that's the situation today. Next month, next year, we'll probably know a lot more. So before I open it up to any comments or questions, there's another talk, May 17th, on head lice and lousy information. And just as a little teaser here, virtually everything that we and the medical community ever learned or was told about head lice is actually a myth. So, and that's a problem. Trying to dispense with archaic and misinformation is more difficult than learning something anew and trying to spread that information. So, okay, questions?
Is Tripoli the only one that we really have to worry about here in terms of your contact with mosquito?
No, we have several others. So West Nile is endemic. You're much more likely to encounter West Nile in Tripoli, but West Nile is far less likely to make you sick. We have, we know of about 8 other insect and tick-transmitted viruses locally. We know that they occur out there. There's something called Cache Valley, which we've known about for years, going from deer to mosquito to deer. We now know it sometimes goes into people. We thought up until a couple years ago, so what? Well, now there are people who actually have some sort of illness associated with that. So, yeah, and the more we look, the more we find. So, but the take-home message is protect yourself against any mosquito or any tick. And most mosquitoes are not infected with anything. So you don't freak out if you're bitten by a mosquito or by a tick.
I'm never going outside again.
Well, now they can come inside.
But wait.
All my plans.
Sleep in a clean room.
If you go down the southeastern part of the U.S., there's a tick, the brown dog tick, that can complete its entire life cycle within a home.
No dogs. I don't know.
I think the thing that we're finding, like at EH&S, is that based on the patient population and community we serve, a lot of it has been concerned about reproductive stuff. You know, this is a population where they either have kids, they're trying to have kids, they want to have kids. All their questions have basically been about, oh my God, how do I know if I have it? How do I know if I'm going to get it? You know, I have to go here, I want to go there. It's not safe now to go to Florida, Puerto Rico, you know, all the, as they keep adding other locations, even if they're being reported as having been a place where it was transmitted sexually, people are now concerned it's in the environment. So we're finding a lot of those kinds of questions. One of the things that we had a guy who's been following the CDC and finally found out that the Mass Department of Public Health State Lab has been licensed. And they've agreed to take one of our specimens as one of their validation specimens. So this guy was like first online, he's doing the research, New York's doing it, why isn't Massachusetts doing it? We're like, okay. So now he's one of the first validation specimens going through. We haven't heard back, but it just goes to show you that, you know, he knows he was away at a family wedding. He knows he got sick. He's presuming it was Zika because he was in the Zika area. And he's home now and he wants to know how long does he wait before he starts his family. So for him, knowing that the lab is going to prioritize pregnant women who are sick, then pregnant women who might travel but may not be sick, then he would be at the bottom of the list because he's a guy. But those are the kinds of questions, and that's what's sort of driving that hysteria. But almost all of it.
Well, okay, so a couple things important about that. Wherever Zika is transmitted, so are many other infections. So the same mosquito, if you collect 10,000 Aedes aegypti mosquitoes, you're going to find a few with Zika in a Zika endemic area, and you're going to find a few with yellow fever virus, and a few with chikungunya, and perhaps other things. So just because you're sick doesn't mean it's Zika, and it doesn't even mean it's a mosquito-transmitted infection. It could be something you ate. Who knows? The tests are evolving quickly. There are lots of groups working, have been working for a while, to try to come up with a good diagnostic test. There's still a lot left to be done. The current tests rely mainly upon PCR, so they take a blood sample, and if you have active virus circulating in your system, it's looking for the genetic elements of that, and there's a good chance it's going to be a positive if you're actually circulating that virus. But after you've knocked out the virus, you're going to be PCR negative. So even though you may have been infected, you're going to come back as a negative value on that test. So we then have to rely on serologic tests. So again, a blood draw, they look for your antibodies that are produced in response to that infection. And for that, we have a long, long way to go because some of the best serologic tests that we have don't distinguish well between Zika and yellow fever and chikungunya and yet some other viruses. What we can say is, well, you have had a history, and we can even say fairly recent or long ago, with one of these viruses that are related. But I think in a matter of months, we'll probably have better tests. Now, how do you protect yourself? Well, so yeah, Massachusetts State Labs is one of the best. New York State and Massachusetts are the leaders. They've been licensed by CDC to start performing these tests. They're very, very precise, and it's good work that goes on there. And what they learn will be rolled out to other labs in other states, and then this may be commercially available at some point. But right now, even the state labs and CDC, they're having trouble interpreting the results that they're getting. So vaccination, people are always asking, well, can't I just get vaccinated? And the answer is no. And what I learned this weekend is the truth of the matter is that it's going to be at least 7.5 years, maybe 8, until it's likely there will be a commercially available vaccine for use. It's a long, long time in coming. So, Val.
Can you tell us what your favorite repellent is and how you would use it? In other words, like how thickly?
Okay, I'm going to give you a broad choice because my favorite depends on where I am in the world and what's likely to be biting me. So around here, and for much of the world, I will use DEET. You can buy it almost anywhere. You can buy it here. It has a very bad reputation. It smells bad to a lot of people. It's kind of greasy. You don't want to rub your eye or stick your finger up your nose, as kids do all the time, because it can burn. But it's usually not a permanent problem. In a couple hours, you're good to go. DEET is a very good broad spectrum repellent. Works against most kinds of mosquitoes, not all, and against many other blood-feeding creatures. You can put it directly on your skin. A little bit of it is taken up, and you end up peeing most of that out just a few hours later. There's no long-term known effect of it. You don't necessarily need to use the most concentrated stuff, but nor should you necessarily want to use the lowest concentration because that won't protect you at all. So something 10, 15, 20%, even 30% DEET is good. Alcohol formulation will last a couple of hours. Maybe a little longer for some people. There are time-release formulations that could last you 8 hours. The thing is, you carry the bottle, the tube with you. You put it on. Use it liberally, almost to the point that it's dripping off you. If you just put one drop on and spread it around, it's going to afford zero protection. You have to have a lot of it. I mean, you don't want to swim in it, but you have to put a fair bit on. When the activity starts to wane, when mosquitoes are coming in and landing on you, then maybe it's time to reapply it. So DEET still works, and it works against these mosquitoes that I've targeted here. A company markets something called picaridin or IR3535, which has a very good track record, much greater acceptability in terms of its feel and odor, but may not have quite the longevity, so you may have to reapply that more often. There's permethrin, which acts as a repellent and as an insecticide. You put that on your clothing, not on your skin. Not that because it's harmful, but because a lot of it's taken up by the skin, and then it's no longer on the surface to have the effect. So you treat your clothing, you pre-treat the clothing, let it dry, and it will survive dozens of wash and dry cycles. It works really well, against ticks as well. My favorite actually is something you can't buy in this country. And I normally don't mention brand names, but in South and Central America, it's sold under the name of No Moss. And in West Africa, in a few countries, it's now marketed under the name of No Mo. Very short story, and then I'll finish up. Back when I ran the lab at the School of Public Health, I did a lot of testing of repellents. Someone came to me, this is goes back 15 years or so now, and he was a real pest. He said, I've formulated something, it's the next best thing to white bread. I said, I don't like white bread. But I get these calls every day. So in order to, it turned out, I figured it was easier to test the stuff and tell him it didn't work than to take his daily phone calls. He was becoming a tremendous pest. So I took the stuff into my insectary, and we did a test, and my jaw dropped. This was the most magnificent stuff I had ever tested. And I thought, oh, it's a fluke, beginner's luck. So we got 10 students who volunteered. We had protocols for all this. And it worked amazingly well on everybody. And I've taken it to the field. I've been all over the world with the stuff. I've been down to the Everglades where my body resembled that ankle with the 100 mosquitoes on it. And it was absolutely wonderful. But it's not, it hasn't gone through EPA approval yet. Not for EPA's fault, it's because the guy who invented it is an idiot in terms of a business person. But it is available elsewhere, and it's remarkable stuff. And it has been shown, actually published studies, showing that it's reduced the risk of illness from not only malaria transmitting mosquitoes, but also the Aedes mosquitoes. So if we had that available, this would be something to use. And it's, importantly, people don't use it because it's a good repellent. They use it because it smells good. If you take this new nifty stuff and say, this is going to protect your health, use it, a few people will use it. Human nature is put it on the shelf. The women use it because they think it smells like perfume. The men use it because they think it smells like aftershave. It's refreshing. The kids use it because it's smoothing to the skin and it smells nice. And they all report they get a better night's sleep. So you've all experienced that whine of the mosquito at night in the air. That's not this mosquito, it's Culex pipiens that sings in your ear. And it's incessant. You lose sleep over it. People are using this material because it lets them sleep better. And for every 300 Culex singing in your ear, there's one anopheles that could spell doom to you. That's why you should use it, that one mosquito. But they use it for the wrong reasons, but they get the benefit. So, okay, I'm over time. I'll be here if anyone wants to ask other questions.